We begin this road trip to Gallup from Mesita, just west of Albuquerque. We see the owl made of lava, a natural sculpture, and we start to wind through the old road and Dead Man's Curve. The mesas seem painted with horizontal stripes of red sandstone. Early trails became the National Trail. Early railroad tracks were laid along that trail, and Route 66 in 1926 followed those rails. In earlier days, the Santa Fe Railroad brought tourists very close to this mission church. Budville, later nicknamed Bloodville, was a place where you could get automobile service, towing, food, gasoline, and cabins. But in 1967, owner Bud Rice was gunned down in his place. Mrs. Rice continued to operate the store, and 6 years later, her second husband was killed in a fight near where Mr. Rice had died. San Fidel, a small Spanish community with St. Joseph's Church, built in 1920. We find beautiful scenery and ghostly remnants of the past. If these old 1926 roads could talk, they would tell the story of a 3-decade process whereby an interstate highway in the plans would divert traffic to a super slab called I-40 with 75-mile-an-hour speed limits, and it would render this old highway the road less traveled. Grants is an early railroad camp and was named for 3 brothers who were railroad builders. In 1950, a local sheep herder, a Navajo who lived near Bluewater, discovered uranium. The mining of uranium in Grants between the 1950s and the 1980s brought unbelievable prosperity. It had a sad ending because the radioactivity brought illness and death to many of the miners. Here's a reminder of those mining days. Grants is full of beautiful motels with the flair of the heyday of Route 66 from the 50s and 60s. Today, many Route 66 enthusiasts and cross-country travelers still find Grants a great place to stop. The Old Lux Movie Theater. These vintage signs are a treasure, and their plight is uncertain. Some of the signs that we've shown are no longer there. Bluewater is an almost ghost town, an agricultural community at the foot of the Zuni Mountains. quiet Keimato. Fishermen are attracted to a wonderful lake, and bikers and hikers enjoy the scenery. But did you know that in a secret location here in the middle of nowhere, there is an art installation from 1977 by Walter de Maria? This land art is called the Lightning Field, and it's managed by the Dia Art Foundation in New York. 400 polished stainless steel poles in a grid array 1 mile by 1 kilometer. Each pole 2 inches in diameter, 20 feet high, with solid pointed tips that define a horizontal plane. It's to be walked into as well as viewed. It's not dependent on lightning. Lightning does char the poles and is destructive, and they replace those. But visitors are encouraged to spend as much time as possible during sunrise and sunset, where brilliant gold light reflects. This tiny town of 228 people has a beautiful church. Thoreau, an early railroad town. Was it named for David Henry Thoreau? No one seems to know for sure. Signage punctuates long stretches of lonely road as we approach Gallup. We reach the Continental Divide, where waters to the west flow into the Pacific and to the east into the Atlantic. A curious relic and not unusual in the West to see buildings abandoned. The tiny town of Coolidge has a beautiful lodge. Marathon Petroleum, now the largest refinery in the United States, has a refinery just outside of Gallup. We've arrived at Gallup, gateway to the Native American experience. Navajo, Zuni, and Hopi reservations are nearby, and it's a short drive to the Pueblo ruins at Chaco Canyon and Canyon de Chelly. Gallup is named for David Gallup. He was the paymaster for the railroad, and this was the headquarters of the South Transcontinental Railroad. The Rex Museum, which is an old hotel, covers the local history, railroading, and mining. The Gallup Cultural Center features Native American crafts and cultural exhibits. Check out the Red Rock Museum for heritage pottery and silver. Gallup is a center for art and culture, as well as a place you can find Route 66 vintage motels from the 50s and 60s, lots of googie architecture, and great neon lights. One of the favorite motels along the historic Route 66 stretch is the Blue Spruce. Built in 1949, they advertised that they were close to 6 national monuments in the picturesque Indian country. Gallup's most famous hotel is the El Rancho. Many Western movies were filmed around Gallup, and the stars seem to love staying here. Today you can get a John Wayne breakfast. The hotel boasts beautiful furnishings and lots of memorabilia. Gallup is one of the finest places in the world to buy Native American jewelry. In 1990, the Indian Arts and Crafts Act was put in place to levy heavy fines for manufacturing and selling fake Indian jewelry. You can request a certificate of authenticity for your purchases. Some of our vendors will carry pawn jewelry. Pawn has a sad but interesting history. In past times, Native Americans wore their turquoise jewelry for adornment and also as a protector of good health. When they needed money, they didn't have banks or ready cash, so they would take pieces to the local trading post and pawn or receive cash to take them through the winter until crops came in or their sheep were shorn. This jewelry could be redeemed later and taken back to the family. If the items were not taken out of pawn, they became the property of the trading post. These items were called dead pawn and could be resold. The sadness comes in as to what the circumstances might have been that a family couldn't recover their treasured turquoise. Gallup is a city of murals, and here are a few examples. One of the highlights of Gallup for years has been the Indian dances that are held nightly through the tourist season. As we leave Gallup and head west, we're just 22 miles from the border of New Mexico and Arizona. We'll enjoy crossing the Pueblo lands with the beautiful scenery, and we'll dance our way to Arizona.